Allow me to say that what we have embarked on is a demonstration of political commitment and political will to the issue of transparency. Yesterday, some 22 plus years ago, when there was the year of the return to democracy, Dr. Jagan made it quite clear that as we move to develop a democratic government and a democratic society, transparency and accountability will be hallmarks of that commitment and that pledge. And then most recently at the UN General Assembly, President Obama urged that governments need to be responsive to citizens' recall for openness, for accountability, for responsiveness, and very importantly, for transparency. And if we've looked in terms of our own society and what we've been doing in Guyana, we've seen that consistently we've been able at a national level, building into our national institutions, greater mechanisms that will allow and facilitate accountability and transparency. Some may argue, and with merit, that more could have been done, and some would better argue that what has been done could have been done better. But at the end of the day, what we have seen is a discernible pattern, an unwavering commitment in building institutions and mechanisms that allow, that facilitate, and that reinforce accountability and transparency in the operations of our society as a whole, but more so our government, which has to and must be accountable to the people and to all stakeholders. And an important element of that transparency, accountability drive, comes back to numbers. And the key mechanism in dealing with that is when we can have timely and annual Auditor General reports of cent collected and spent by the government. And over the past 2 decades, we've had that consistently. And just over a week ago, the Speaker of the National Assembly himself received the latest report. And we've moved, even in that, not only made a commitment to have these reports done, but also we've moved it out. It was where the report first used to be coming to the Minister of Finance, and where the Auditor General Department was not autonomous, to one where it is autonomous and reports directly to the National Assembly, and its report goes directly to the Public Accounts Committee, which is chaired by the opposition. And I make that point because in the absence at the macro level, one in terms of the political commitment, and it's not only political talk, but also there's political action, undertakings such as this that we have embarked on could not be possible. And it would be, if we don't have an existing macro governmental and societal framework of transparency and openness, when we will not be able to maximize and to have the sufficient benefit of undertaking an initiative such as this. And there are others that I can point to in various areas on the social sector, because when you make reports in terms of what we're doing for children and what we're doing for women and what we're doing to advance indigenous rights, and all across the spectrum, it also features of having an accountable and transparent government and building a transparent society. The dollars are important, what you do with revenue, what you do, how you spend it, but also we must not only focus on the dollars too, but also look at the social side, the environmental side. And at those levels too, you have accountability, you have transparency, you have a reporting mechanism that exists in Guyana today that you cannot find in many other societies, developing as well as developed societies in this regard. And so here we are at this Inception workshop, and what we intend to achieve. And the question is, what do we intend to achieve? The presentations you've heard previously would have spoken to the advantages in terms of having EITI, and we've looked at other countries, and we continue to study those. And we've seen other countries too who have subscribed and indicated their willingness. In 2012, I think it was May 2012, we made the bold step in signaling to the EITI Secretariat that we want to join. But joining the EITI system is not something that you put in your application and respond approved. There is, first of all, there has to be national buy-in. And it is one thing to talk about building transparency and accountability, but then we miss that critical step of democracy, meaning coming about to that decision at that point in time without the involvement of all stakeholders. And so the national working group, the working stakeholder group was set up, which brought together all stakeholders, discussing and understanding EITI and attending international fora, so that collectively there would be a full appreciation of what EITI process is about. But we made it quite clear that whilst we are willing, and this process has been guided, if some are arguing that perhaps we're taking too long, because this process has been guided all the way by the EITI Secretariat as to what we need to do and how we get it done if our candidacy will be favorably considered. So there is that groundwork. And we've engaged a number of our international partners, the IDB, the World Bank. We've been in discussion with the US government through the US Embassy in building capacity. We've talked to a number of local organizations too. We've talked to a number of partners that we have engagement with. Take, for instance, the Kingdom of Norway. And we've reached out in looking at how it is we can enhance our capacity so that we can accelerate this process, even looking at the resources. And as much as we are undertaking this exercise, it is not a cheap one either. And cost is very important when you have a developing society such as where you have limited resources. And we're expending in excess of $17 million just to undertake this scoping study so that we can be fully and adequately prepared. Money of the state, this is not the handout that we've received by any partner. This is money that we have committed, that we've had to reallocate from some other important commitment or need that is out there so that we can undertake. So even as we embark on this, there's also a cost to doing it, not only in terms of political will, not only in terms of time, but there's a cost in terms of money commitment that we've had to make in this regard. And it comes back to why it is. We see the sector as growing. Someone referred to the work being done with support from UNDP in evaluating the impact and understanding the impact of foreign direct investment and how can we do it better going forward. And from all indications, we see the extractive industry is growing and grow. We have in our room here too the representative from Exxon, and they will tell you very much how they're moving rapidly in terms of undertaking their exploration program and the potential for oil and gas. It's not only in terms of looking at our minerals and our precious stone, and also the EITI is not restricted to that as we've seen in other countries. They even move to quarry, sand, loom, all types of other activities that relate to the mining sector. And we see in all of these areas where we see expansion and the possibility, particularly with oil and gas and other minerals and other resources that we have, we see that possibility in terms of its development and production taking place. So that the whole sector will grow. And if we do not adequately prepare to deal with issues of transparency in terms of how do we manage the resources, how do we utilize the resources, how do we support businesses and other stakeholders, we will be doing an injustice. We'll be doing an injustice to this country and to future generations of this country. But also, it is part because investors are very much comfortable when they come to a country where you have gold standards being pursued for transparency and accountability. And And whilst we have weaknesses and inadequacies in our system, we are proud to say that we have been punching above our weight in this regard, in building safeguards, in building accountability system, in building the mechanisms of openness, and where internationally, at any international forum, we can talk about the activities taking place in Guyana that meet international benchmarks. And this undertaking and this effort is to take us to that level, particularly in the extractive industry, and particularly understanding what has happened, as is cliched, called the resource curse. And doing this here too, whilst it's the pursuit of better accountability and transparency within the sector, it is also for us to mitigate against the effects of what we call the resource curse that has, in fact, plagued other societies that are rich and have a vast amount of natural resources in different continents of the world. So it is also part of us mitigating against the effects of resource curse in our country, particularly for the mining sector, for the oil and gas sector, and the extractive industry as a whole. And we're not only focusing here in this particular area, but you would have heard reference to the EU FLEC process too, which focuses primarily on the forestry sector. And we've started that process since 2010, but it really reached a point of acceleration when we started engaging much more aggressively the EU about 2 years ago, around early part of 2012, to move that process forward because it is not as similar, but is also a scheme of accountability and traceability and activities within the forestry sector. And again, we are impatient in terms of moving to the completion of that program. But what it points to, looking at the EU FLEC program and looking at what we've done in EITI, it is not an overnight process, but it's a process that requires us to undertake necessary steps. So once we have subscribed to these schemes of openness and greater transparency at an international level, we would, one, and very importantly, because on both programs, there is the requirement or the necessity for it to be successful, there must be national stakeholder buy-in. And a lot of the efforts were aimed in terms of having national stakeholder buy-in, because people and companies and other stakeholders perhaps will have some level of suspicion as to why it is perhaps, and I've heard the discussion, not by Mr. Harding himself, but some of his colleagues in the mining sector, that the government wants to know their business, and that we want to know how much money they're making, and we want to go after them more in a much more aggressive way. So there are these suspicions as to why it is we are undertaking. And a process and an undertaking, an open undertaking of the process itself, will certainly lend and allow greater understanding and appreciation, as well as buy-in in terms of this effort. But I want to reiterate, one, our commitment to the EITI candidacy. I know there's a process and we have to determine our readiness, but I want to say this as a representative of one of the key stakeholders. We are committed to the candidacy of EITI, and I want to advise our consultants that the sector, we don't stop at Christmas. So if anyone gives you the impression that they'll be out for Christmas, at least from the ministry, you're not adequately informed. So we don't expect a stop and start, and I want us to work, all stakeholders in this room, to support the team here undertaking the scope and study, that we can move very quickly to the point in which we can, as it were, be able to finalize our application and have all the necessary work plan and the requirements as outlined by EITI, so that we can, as it were, reach to a point where candidacy can be positively considered. On that note, I want to encourage stakeholders here to benefit from this session. That's why we brought everyone together, so that there can be, as it were, full disclosure, full understanding, and also full support for this process. Thank you very much.